right. Good morning, Emily. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I am good. It's nice to have you on the show today.
Thank you
Kelly
so
is
much.
off somewhere busy, right?
Yes, she's in San Diego.
Nice. I am up in DC. I was at an event last night for Making America Healthy Again. And it was sort of a pep rally around health. And I think today, on my way up here, I was thinking about how can we tie that into our show today. And I think first, I just want to remind everybody that's watching that the objective of this show, Unprocessed and Unfiltered, is to get beyond avoiding unhealthy things and trying to make what is an actual nutrient dense, healthy choice when it comes to nutrition. And that is something that gets very blurred. We do a really good job of saying, oh, this is really bad for you. But then we don't do a good job of making it really clear what is truly healthy. And so Kelly and I started the show is an objective and an extension of the food is health work that Carter and I are doing to say, hey, how do we actually start talking as a society, as a population, as a consumer base around nutrient density. And instead of these healthy for you claims and trends and foods, we actually get to the brass tacks of that. And so a couple of things kind of popped up in the news, and one has really been in my face lately, which is this protein craze. And so I'm glad you joined on that. But the other thing that I think will be fun to throw into this if we end up with time, which goes along the lines again of MAHA, is I mean, one, the protein craze had already started. So I do want to be clear. Like sometimes people are like, oh, it's because of the new DGAs, which is the dietary guidelines. Um, but the truth of the matter is the protein craze had started before that. And I think this change of the DGAs amplified it. And also, I kind of put a bad name to it a bit. The problem is that with any good push and shift, food companies, especially the big consumer packaged good companies, are going to jump on it and ride it as much as they can. And so,
Yeah.
right, so this whole DGA is now as at the top of the pyramid instead of having grains, we've got protein. And what those DGAs didn't, and the New England Journal of Medicine put out an article about this, is saying it's great, like fine, we put protein at the top of the pyramid, but we gave zero guidance of what kind of protein.
Right. And they're
And
not
then
all
the
equal.
no, they are not, which I'm going to be quiet in a minute and let you know. But the other piece to this that is really interesting is this also is eat real food. And so the event I was at last night, they actually were giving out, and I lost it along the way, but they were giving out these little lapel pins that said eat real food. And there is a realfood.gov website now. And there was another article that I read that apparently said website is using chatbots for people to be able to go in and create recommendations for meals. So if we have time, I'm going to test that fun little tool out. But
Yep.
let's dive in on the protein front because I wrote about this, I think, right before I left for Scotland a week and a half ago. I was so annoyed because I went to this Nourishing Change conference, and the third booth when you walked into the expo hall was PepsiCo showcasing their protein Doritos. It's like the epitome of what's wrong with let's change the DGA and just sort of have it be a free for all. So, with all of that, Emily, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
So I have a lot of thoughts. And this is definitely something that being in private practice daily, people are coming in my office and saying, I got my protein, this much, and this still isn't happening, or I'm still not meeting these goals. And we really dive into this. There's a lot on this topic. The first thing is not all protein is created equal, like you're saying. So by saying eat more protein, this is not meaning that red meat and butter and protein Doritos are equivalent to, a lean chicken breast or, quinoa or soybeans. Like these things are not created equal. And really diving into protein in general, we know that protein is composed of amino acids, and we have essential and non-essential amino acids that make complete proteins. So, in order to have a complete protein, the food source needs to provide all essential amino acids, which our body needs but cannot produce. So, there are things that are not a complete protein. Things that are not complete proteins, I am sure, are things like protein Doritos. Things that are
So
complete
talk
protein.
about so let's talk about that a little bit because I was a vegetarian for 8 years
Mhm.
and really got deep into the food science of that and understanding that I was not able to get certain things through a plant-based diet. Again, nothing wrong with that. I'm not a black and white kind of person when it comes to this because I think it's all very personalized.
Mhm.
But let's talk about protein, the different protein's not just a thing. To your point, they're the amino acids. And if you can break down some of that a little bit for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just like carbohydrates and fats, protein, our third macronutrient, is built from these building blocks called amino acids. Essential amino acids are the building blocks of protein that we need, but we cannot produce, so we must obtain them through our food. Non essential amino acids our body needs, but we can produce. Now, these amino acids are important for muscle growth, for our hormone regulation, our immune system, our hair, our skin, our nails. We need these amino acids. And it is possible to obtain all of these essential amino acids through a plant based diet, but it definitely takes more consideration and thinking ahead of time than it would if you were eating animal products. And the reason for that is animal proteins are naturally complete proteins, meaning that they contain naturally all of the essential amino acids. So if you eat one source of an animal protein, you're getting the amino acids in some quantity that you need for that day to consider complete protein that your body cannot make. You're obtaining those through food. Now, plant proteins, most of them are considered incomplete proteins because they do not contain those essential amino acids. So you need to eat a wider variety of foods in order to obtain all of those essential amino acids. So, for example, while you could eat, one chicken breast and obtain your amino acid quantities for the day on an animal including diet, on a plant-based diet, you may have to have, quinoa and beans and cashews to obtain the same amount of amino acids.
Well, okay, so let's talk about this for a second. Um, my husband last night was rooting through my bag to see if there was any chocolate. I typically have really good dark chocolate in my bag somewhere, and there was nothing. And I've been on, like, I'll call it a travel bender. Like, I haven't been home for more than 24 hours in, like, weeks.
Yep.
Um, and so this is what he last night I keep these in my bag. And so let's talk about these for a second because these things are protein bombs. So
Mhm.
I'm all about because I'm a perimenopausal woman, protein is like supposed to be a hobby for me or a job. I'm not sure I think it needs to be a job. Um, there's a lot there. I'm not even gonna go there. But these to me are a gold mine because I'm also a petite perimenopausal woman, which means that the caloric intake that I am allowed every day, despite how active I try to be, is still really abysmal. And
Mhm.
so I'm always looking for high protein to calorie ratio, right? So if I'm going to eat, like I have this thing, if I can eat 300 calories, or if I can eat like less than 200 calories and get 30 grams of protein, I'm a happy girl. And
Mhm.
so beans, this is an interesting thing I want to hit on is like, so we talk about meat as if it's the holy grail of protein, right?
Yeah,
But
which
I
isn't.
wanna go to correct, and I wanna go to a bean. So let me talk about this a little bit, is the beauty of this bean, so let's talk about where the amino acid profile is different, right, where you're gonna have to make it up somewhere else. And the other piece that I want you to hit on a little bit is bioavailability of protein. So, like, we don't we don't metabolize plant protein as much or we don't absorb as much of the protein from those amino acids from plants. It's not quite as bioavailable to our systems, right?
Right.
But the flip side is that these particular beans, these are lupini beans for anyone that's looking. The beauty of lupini beans is a lot of times when you eat, I find I get frustrated because black beans, garbanzo beans, all those beans, they're wonderful for fiber, but their protein to carbohydrate ratio is a little bit frustrating. I feel like if I would literally, if I tried to use beans for my protein source for how much I'm supposed to eat, I'd eat nothing but beans because of the amount of carbohydrates that come with those beans. So I love lupinis because they have a much higher protein to carb ratio as beans go. So, but let's the other benefit to these. So I'm not going to get as much, my body's not going to absorb as much protein as it would in the meat version of this. But the fiber of these is spectacular. And then, as Kelly and I have talked about in the past, fiber is critical for our guts, for digestion, metabolism, all of these things, and for our brain health. And so I think it's important when we talk about protein, it's complicated and people, it gets oversimplified, right?
It does. And fiber, that's another big thing is, yeah, you can increase protein by increasing those processed foods that are advertising as high protein. But by doing that, you're simultaneously not going to be eating, as much fiber, likely fruits, vegetables, whole grains. And fiber is super important for not only gastrointestinal health, but cardiovascular health as well. And that's a whole other aspect of this protein craze with animal protein in particular. Naturally, animal protein, yeah, is a complete protein, but it will be higher in saturated fat. And we know that saturated fat is contributing to higher risk of cardiovascular diseases. It increases our LDL cholesterol. So by eating more fiber, you also lower your LDL cholesterol. So again, just hitting on that point that not all protein sources are created equal. And, we don't want to highlight protein while disregarding fiber. Fiber really is a nutrient that a lot of us are lacking, and we're lacking it because a lot of us are focused on this protein and these other sources without getting that fiber content.
And would you say, so let's talk about like the ultra processed version of protein. And I think I have a sample bar. I'm sure I do. See, I have my travel stash in
I
here.
love that.
But I have all sorts of goodies that I can pull out. So actually, yes. So okay, I think I have this will be good. So I have um well, so let's talk about, well, let me actually use one example of something and then I'll show you this protein powder. Um that I keep. I love this. So this is so fun. It's like, here's my travel bag stash that
Let's do it.
it just comes with me. Um and I'm always looking for better and new things. So if anybody's on here and they have hacks that they're carrying around or they're please put them in the notes for us all. I'm always I want to know what I'm missing. But so this will be controversial. It's not meant to be. Anybody who knows, if you've just stumbled on this, then this may like get the hairs on your neck high. But if you read our content and you know me, I'm a bipartisan person. I'm all about health and not about who's leading that charge in the country at the moment or a specific party or anything like that. And so I see MAHA as a tailwind, not as this like good, bad, yes, no. There's I could pick apart the things that are wrong with it. I could also magnify all the good things. I just want to focus on the tailwinds towards helping us fix our food system because that's my objective. So that being said, Kennedy RFK's wife spoke last night at the event that I was at, and she made this comment, and this goes back to I talked about beans and fiber, but I also want to talk about pairing protein with other foods and how to make it more digestible, right? Was she made the point, well, he works all the time and then but he'll at whatever time he'll take a break and he'll have a steak and fermented vegetables and then he'll go back to work. And I think there's no surprise that that statement was made. But what I did pull from that, instead of rolling my eyes like most people would, because of the controversy around the dietary guidelines and its emphasis on meat and steak in particular being one of the icons on said DGA, um, I will instead focus on the fact that she made a point about fermented vegetables. So, talk about fermented vegetables for a minute and about how that pairs. If you are eating a really high source of protein, maybe you're not going to eat lupini beans, but you have access to fermented vegetables. Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, so fermented vegetables, fermentation in general is great for gut health. This process kind of changes that structure of the carbohydrates. It helps our gut microbiome, feeding that good bacteria, which helps outweigh that bad gut bacteria and helps for prime digestion. But I definitely, with that, if you're eating a jar of sauerkraut or kimchi, what does that sodium look like? That's a whole other, kind of caveat. And, what is the fiber content overall in terms of volume? How much fermented vegetables are you eating? You know, how
Yes,
does that
yes.
few tablespoons of maybe sauerkraut equivalent, to a salad with dark leafy greens and carrots and peppers and tomatoes and, beans. So there definitely are pros and cons, but I think the fermented vegetables definitely do help with digestion. And I'm a big advocate for fermented vegetables, for sourdough bread. I think fermentation is a great tool for gut health and it helps with skin health, brain fog, energy levels, all good things. Fermentation is great.
Yep. So let's now dive into, so we've talked about pairing, we've talked about fiber, we've talked about, I do want to go back to plant versus animal at some point, and bioavailability. We haven't really necessarily talked about that. And I think this, let's use this next thing that I'm going to bring up as sort of a transit. It'll help us transition into both of those. So the first, there's two things about this. So this is protein powder, and I carry this, and I have a, love-hate relationship with protein powder. Um, I'm a real food person. I just have this hard time getting over the idea that eating something like this is better for me than eating the natural source. I feel like for 35,000 years, evolution designed us to eat the food that, we grew, that was fresh, and again, accessibility and convenience is a big issue here, so I don't wanna undervalue that.
Correct.
But this, let's talk about this outside of the convenience piece, which is, let's zoom in on the ingredients, right? That's a whole
Mhm.
lot of ingredients. And so, sure, it is 100 calories, it's got 6 grams of carbs. It's got only a half a gram of fiber, but it's got 20 grams of protein, right? So this is that elusive 100 calories, 20 grams.
Yeah.
It is it is interesting in that, so this particular one is grass-fed whey protein isolate. I don't love that it has xylitol.
Mhm.
It's got prebiotic isomalto, it's IMO, natural flavors, non-fat dry milk, coconut milk powder, cocoa powder, xanthan gum, stevia leaf extract, sea salt, and then tricalcium phosphate and monk fruit extract. So, as protein powders go, this is a fairly clean, not a ton of ingredients, but it's still processed. So, talk about, kind of this ultra processed protein, and that goes into the Doritos. And then the second part is, let's talk about, how does your body, like, I've read really conflicting pieces about whether or not we absorb. Some things say, oh, you absorb this super fast. And some say, are you really absorbing it all?
Right. And I will say, that one is that example. If I was going to pick a protein powder, that would be one I would choose. The whey protein. Whey is usually a great source of protein that is shown to boost muscle growth and help satiety. And the whey protein is one that's been around for forever.
And
Compared,
it's animal, just so folks know.
yeah,
Like, it is animal protein, so it does have that full amino chain.
correct. Now, in terms of bioavailability, we know that in general, we absorb animal based proteins better than plant based proteins. And that goes back to the amino acid profile. And just because those complete proteins are absorbed, meaning that we will get more bang for our buck, for lack of better words. You would have to eat a larger quantity, a larger variety of plant-based proteins to obtain the same nutrients, the same benefits from a smaller quantity of animal protein. Basically, long story short. Um, but in terms of, the protein powders, the big thing really is that convenience. Some people, especially if you are in that calorie deficit or you're kind of in that situation where this protein goal might be super high and I'm really struggling to get there without the calories exceeding my nutrient needs. The protein pasta, the protein powders can be a good tool, but again, it goes into that processing, which what other ingredients are in there? So we had stevia leaf, we had monk fruit, we had the xylitol. Those can all be irritating to the GI tract. Those can all cause some issues for individuals with blood sugar regulation dysfunction. Um, Again, you're getting more fillers rather than if you had a balanced plate with a lean protein, a whole grain, a fruit, a veggie, a healthy fat. So it kind of takes away that opportunity to complete that meal, complete that plate with whole foods, high quality nutrients, your fiber, your healthy fats, and now you're kind of, having that protein, but what's coming along with it.
So, what if somebody is your client, right? What do you tell them? Let's say I'm a perimenopausal woman that shows up on your door, and I'm not, but let's just say I'm pre-diabetic. Let's say I have an A1C of, 6.5. What are you going to tell me about protein? What am I going to be looking for that is nutrient? Again, my focus here is nutrient density. And let's talk about it from I'm going to go after a real food source, and then I'm going to also look for convenient options.
Right. And in this case, I do talk highly about, other than animal proteins that you would typically think of, like a baked chicken breast or ground beef, what about a reduced fat cheese stick or hard boiled eggs or Greek yogurt or cottage cheese, which again are all animal based, but we can also have hummus or we can have dairy free yogurt or there is plant protein, the pea protein powder, if you are looking for a more convenient option. There are beans, tofu. Soy is a complete protein. So soy does contain all essential amino acids. Edamame, tempeh, tofu are complete proteins. Um, in that case, if you are plant-based, that might be an opportunity to use those lupini beans, looking for that protein to calorie ratio. But the pre-diabetic comment also does add another layer because something I see often, especially with individuals who are worried about protein and might be on that pre-diabetic spectrum or have diabetes, they automatically think, okay, I'm going to eat less carbs, I'm going to eat more protein. And this is really where we focus on the, okay, not all protein is created equal because, you can go from eating a lot of carbs to reducing your carbs and focusing on protein. However, what kind of protein are you getting? And now are we going to need to be concerned about your cholesterol? Are you getting enough carbs? That's the other part of this. Carbs are important. We need carbohydrates. Carbohydrates play a role, a very important role in our bodies. And we want to make sure we're getting these macronutrients in their, preferred quantities rather than just getting uneven amounts because we think that more protein leads to more muscle growth, which more protein does not equal more muscle growth. That's a long
Interesting.
short. But so if you are eating an enormous amount of protein, your body can only use so much of that protein at a time towards muscle growth. Your body will then go through a chemical reaction where protein loses its nitrogen and can be used for energy as glucose or fat. But protein is not stored in our bodies like fat or carbohydrates. So this is a different reaction, and this is where a lot of people kind of get confused. It's not like you eat more protein and you store it for later and your muscles just bulk up. Once your muscles hit that point where they've absorbed what they can absorb and use, you're no longer eating protein to enhance your muscles. It's now being used for something else. And that gets into a whole realm of, kidney health. Too much protein is damaging to your kidneys, and that's a whole, other danger to this protein, protein, protein.
So, interestingly enough, I cannot find it appears that they've taken this chatbot down. I can't find it on Eat Real Food, interestingly. And I don't know if it's just my computer, but I am not seeing it on here, which does not surprise me. But there you go. So, all right. So we've got, we're at the last 4 minutes of our fun here. Let's talk about we always say like do this one thing, right? Like what is sort of do this one thing. I guess um I, I what would you say somebody should do, um, like, what do you think one thing somebody should do on the protein front, knowing that our objective here is to help people with nutrient density?
So, two things. A lot of times I talk about with clients that not only the amount of protein you get by the end of the day is important, but how we're distributing that across the day. So if your protein goal is, 90 grams of protein for the day, getting that in 25 at breakfast, 25 at lunch, 25 at dinner, and filling in the rest with snacks will give you much more energy and help your blood sugar regulation and also help with that muscle growth and breakdown and turnover because of that, muscle capacity for protein. That will give you much better results than if you were to have maybe cereal for breakfast and, a low protein lunch and then eat a ton of protein later in the day. But in terms of protein, I encourage individuals to just look at ingredient labels and while focusing on protein, what are you eating with the protein? And what else is on the plate? And if it's just protein, being able to think to yourself, something's missing. If this is a meal, protein is not meeting those 5 food groups. We're meeting one food group. What can we add? I'm a big believer in eat what you want, add what you need. If you want that steak, eat the steak, but what can you add to balance out that meal? Fiber, healthy fats. Can we add, a whole grain, something in there?
Okay. Very, very interesting. So I think for me, my do this one thing would be um, kind of to your last, kind of that middle point you made about where is the protein coming from, right? What comes along with the protein is, I would say, more, why are you chasing the protein, and how much do you truly need? Really pay attention to that. So, like, if your target is, I mean, first of all, do this one thing is figure out your basal metabolic rate. There are a million calculators, and just do some basic research on what the macro profile should look like for you, given your age, given your gender, given your activity level. And I think that's a big one, right? Is like, be honest with yourself. Are you going to the gym? Because if you're not going to the gym to lift weights, then how much protein do you really need versus how much do you think you need? And versus other real food that's going to give you a lot more on the micronutrient profile perspective, all of the different vitamins and minerals that you don't want to not get those in lieu of trying to obsess about that protein, because protein fills you up. If you're focused and fixated on getting 130 grams of protein a day and that's all you're eating, right? The thing we haven't talked about is GLP-1s with the protein, and I'm not going to go there. That was a little bit of last week. So I guess that maybe my do one thing I was going to say, I'm going to do two things. So do one thing, go out and figure out how much protein you should be getting, and according to you as a human being, not I read this influencer said this, or I heard that, or my friend does this, but I, Ellen Brown, am doing XYZ. I am 53, almost 54, and I need Y, right? The other thing I would say to people is, um, what protein are you eating? And what, to your point, like, look at the package. So do this one thing. If you're eating processed protein, what else are you eating with that protein? And can you pronounce the ingredient? Does your body, what, like, really, and are you comfortable that there's not other, what, like, it gets into even like the chemicals and things that might be along with this. Can you do some research on the source of this? Which that always frustrates me because I still don't even feel like I know that about this. But it's, what are you going to do?
Well, also, like I tell people, tune into your body and how do you feel after you have that protein powder? Compare that to how you feel after maybe you do have, beans and ground beef or something, and
Yeah,
like do you feel bloated after you have the protein powders? Do you feel like a slump in the middle of the day? And if
but not
so,
after the first week of having them. See, that's the other thing is people are like, I can't eat beans. I'm like, no, you can eat beans. You just have to ease into eating beans.
Right. And that's, yeah, the thing with fiber too. Sometimes I say increase your fiber, but slowly. Let's not like
Exactly.
jump into it.
Exactly. Exactly. So, all right. Well, we're at the bottom of the hour. So, and I don't have any questions. I just got one comment from Megan saying, "Oh, yum," when I was holding up the lupini beans. I put
Yeah,
those on my power greens the other night. So good.
so
So,
good.
all
I
right.
like
So
the brain.
yeah. So, I think we've done our thing. We've talked about protein and, well, I'm sure Kelly and I will cover it again. And I think next week we'll dive into maybe part 2 of protein and talk more about GLP-1s and their impact on protein and muscle and those kinds of things. Because I know a lot of folks are using GLP-1s very successfully. And I think helping people navigate that, again, nutrient density and sustainability and not just the short-term fix. So
Absolutely.
awesome. Well, thank you for joining.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yes. And for everybody tuning in, this is another week of Unprocessed and Unfiltered. All right. Have a good day.